E-Man Rush Audio presents Light of Guidance, Aqeedah 101 by Yasir Qadhi, Part 5.
So we've talked a little bit about the Islamic proofs for Rububiyyah. I just wanted to delve into a brief foray of the Western proofs for the existence of God. Those of you who have taken classes in philosophy will know of this topic, and it is something that has occupied the minds of philosophers for centuries and centuries. And that is, how do you prove or disprove, according to those who are atheists, the existence of a creator? Now, before I jump into this, I want to give a little bit of prelude about the Islamic perception, or I should say orthodoxy, because there are many groups within Islam who would disagree with what I'm saying, but Orthodox Muslims, Sunni Muslims, have a very unique view of philosophy. It's not unique in the sense that other people don't agree with it, but it is something that generally speaking you won't hear too often. And that is that the basic premise of philosophy is in contradiction to the basic premise of divinely revealed religions. All divinely revealed religions basically contradict the premises of philosophy. Philosophy posits that man, by nature of his intellect, is able to arrive at all conclusive truths. Full stop. Man can reach reality, can discover the intricacies of everything they need to, merely by contemplation. The aql, or the intellect, is all they need. The intellect will tell them all they need to know. There is no need to turn to any other source. So the intellect can direct them to whether there is or is not a God. The intellect can direct them to how to worship this God. The intellect can direct them to how to live their lives and how to interact with others in their own culture and others outside of another culture. So the intellect alone is sufficient for answering all of the dilemmas and the problems faced by man. This basic premise underlines all philosophical traditions. Pretty much all philosophies assume that mere intellect is all we need to be guided. And this is in direct contradiction to the basic premise of all divinely revealed religions, which claims that without Allah's guidance, you can't do anything. Without Allah's guiding you and Allah's revealing to you, you will never be able to be guided to the correct path. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to inform us about the basic concepts of Iman, the basic concepts of Akhirah, the basic concepts of living our lives. Without Allah's guidance, we are nothing. So the two are very mutually opposed to one another, because philosophers disdain religion. Generally speaking, they look down at all religions. Orthodox religions, and when I say orthodox, I mean all of them. Many of the ancient Yahud and the ancient Nasara, the original Yahud and the Nasara, this is well known. They were very much opposed to philosophy because of this premise. Because the philosophers for them were a bunch of heathens who had no clue about the reality of God and the soul and the hereafter and how to live their lives, and they were just making conclusions without any reality. So Muslim ulama of the first centuries of Islam, Sunni ulama, unanimously took a position against something that was called kalam. Kalam is a very watered down form of philosophy. It's not even falsafa. We have to differentiate between falsafa and kalam. Falsafa is pure philosophy, okay, and that is like the people such as Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi. These are like the real philosophers within the Muslim tradition. Versus kalam is like Islamicized falsafa. Okay, it's falsafa mixed with some Islamic concepts. That's the topic we'll talk about in Aqeedah 2, inshallah. Kalam is basically, for simple understanding, it's watered down philosophy, Islamicized. The ulama of the first three generations were unanimously agreed, were unanimously united in their condemnation of kalam. Forget falsafa. Falsafa had not yet reached the Muslims. It's just kalam right now, which is much better than falsafa. Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, all of the scholars of hadith, all of the scholars of Quran, all of the scholars of our tradition were unanimously united in their condemnation of this watered down philosophy. And Imam Shafi'i has so much, Imam Ahmad has so much, whoever tries to learn his religion through kalam will become a heretic. This is what Imam Ahmad said. Imam Shafi'i said, my ruling with regards to those who study kalam, just study it, is that they be beaten with shoes and with palm sticks, and they be taken around on a donkey in the city, and that it be cried out that this is the punishment for somebody who leaves the Quran and Sunnah and starts studying watered down philosophy, i.e. kalam. And they prohibited Muslims from even studying the subject of kalam completely. There is, as we said, ijma', unanimous consensus amongst the first few generations of Islam that this science should not even be studied. Why? Because this science, the basic premise of it is to give the brain and the intellect much more weight than it deserves. To give the brain and the intellect, the aql, much more power than it actually has. And this leads to very dangerous assumptions, very dangerous arguments. It takes you into tangents which are very, very dangerous. The mind, the average person, does not even think of many of the issues that are raised in philosophy. Yes, I agree, many of the other issues of philosophy are very basic questions of human life, and they are raised by the average person. But all of the questions that are very basic to philosophers are answered in religions. All the religions have answers to these. All the questions that are very esoteric and very abstract, the average human being doesn't even think about them. Does not even, and I challenge any person here who has studied a class in philosophy to tell me otherwise, undergraduate or graduate level, that philosophy literally, it scrambles your brain up. It makes you start thinking in ways that you never thought before, and it brings about doubts about that which you never doubted before. You know, I remember taking a class in my undergraduate days in University of Houston before I knew what Imam Shafi'i said or anybody else said. In my days back then, literally, you know, the professor comes in, and by the end of that hour, people were doubting whether they exist or not. And the question was, how can you prove your own existence? You know, and one of the famous philosophers by the name of Descartes, a 16th century philosopher in Europe, he became famous because he proved he existed. What did he say, the famous phrase? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore, I am. So he proved he existed and he became famous in philosophy. The average human being doesn't even think about this utterly ludicrous question, do I exist or not? But you see, the philosophers began to doubt even the most basic premise, how do I know I exist? Literally, I remember that, you know, the professor actually in the beginning made this question, everybody laughed. By the end of the class, everybody was like, man, yeah, you know, how do you prove you exist? The way you go into the tangents here and there, literally it scrambles your brain up. Not just that, but as I said, the basic premise that you can answer all of life's questions without any guidance from Allah, that you disdain religious guidance. This goes against Allah's mercy and Allah's sending of the prophets and Allah's revealing of the books. It goes against everything that we know. Another indication, I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but have you ever, thought about the fact that every single famous philosopher, from the time of the Socratic philosophers, the ancient Greek philosophers, who are the first philosophers that we have recorded history of, all the way down to the philosophers of our times, the famous philosophers of our times, every one of them, without exception, has his or her own philosophy. They're coming forward with unique answers to the same questions, different answers. In fact, if you come up with the same answers to these questions as somebody else before you, you're not going to be famous, are you? Because then you're a follower. So each of these philosophers has different answers to the same questions. And each one is claiming, I am right. This is the right way. If the aql were sufficient to be guided, then all of the philosophers should have had the same theology, the same methodology, the same concept of ethics, the same concept of virtue. But every single philosopher has a different view of each and every aspect. And this is enough of an indication that mere intellect in and of itself will never guide you correctly. Nobody is saying that you ignore the intellect. Of course not. Muslims are not fools. It's not that you don't have brains. but you put the brains and the intellect in its proper place. You put intellect in its proper place. You don't go beyond and you don't go less than. So, from the orthodox Muslim perspective, philosophy is a useless science. Useless. In fact, it's a dangerous science. All the questions that you need to know answers to, the answers to them are found in the spiritual questions are found in the Quran and Sunnah. As for the physical questions, they're found in the natural sciences. Otherwise, we have no need to turn to opinions of men. That's exactly what philosophy is. Opinions of men that have no basis in anything divinely revealed. And again, there's a lot that can be said, and a lot of people are sometimes a bit insulted when I say this, but this has been the unanimous consensus of all of the Sunni schools of Islam. There are other schools, obviously, the people of Kalam would disagree, some of the other groups of Islam would disagree with this, obviously the philosophers of Islam. And the philosophers of Islam is another example. The most famous philosopher of Islam, whom the Muslims of America are so proud, is Ibn Sina. They say, we gave Avicenna to the world, we gave Ibn Sina to the world. With all due respect, Ibn Sina, nobody considers him to be a Muslim. The Muslims who know who he is don't consider him to be a Muslim. Don't be shocked. Ibn Sina denied that Allah created us. Ibn Sina denied there's a day of judgment. Ibn Sina denied heaven and hell. Somebody who does this, is he a Muslim? Ibn Sina writes in his own, even though this doesn't make him a kafir, this particular thing, but he writes in his own book, he goes, at times of inspiration, when I needed something to inspire me, I would just drink a little bit to get to that stage so I can start writing. He writes this in his own book, okay? These philosophers would leave the prayer and leave all of these acts. This is for the awam, or the goyim or something. It's like, these are for the average folk, it's not for us. Okay, we are above this. Okay, the philosophers, their theology, Al-Farabi said that, Al-Farabi is one of the big philosophers, quote unquote, of Islam. Al-Farabi basically said that the prophets are sent to the backwards and the Bedouin folks, and the philosophers are sent to the intellectual elite. The prophets speak in parables and metaphors because you don't know any better. This concept of heaven and hell and resurrection, this is for you guys to be good. It's not that they really exist. These are all fables of old. Somebody who says this, is this guy a Muslim? So let's be honest, brutally honest here, and let's be very blunt about this. Anybody who denies these basic concepts, Ibn Sina would claim Allah does not know what man is doing. Doesn't know what man is doing. He has no clue, no idea what man is doing. Ibn Sina basically is a blind follower of Aristotle. Aristotle had all of these beliefs. Ibn Sina Arabicized Aristotle. He is literally an Arab version of Aristotle. And when he would say in his writings, Shaykh al-Akbar, the big Shaykh, he's not talking about Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Hajar, well, they're after them anyway. He's talking about Aristotle. He called Aristotle a Shaykh al-Akbar, or al-Ra'is, the boss. Okay? He's the boss, okay? He's the big guy. The philosophers, they would only quote Quran when it suited them. Not that they would base their beliefs on the Quran. Anything that went against what they arrived at, they just rejected it, okay? And we can go on and on here. I mean, the point being that the basic premise of philosophy is in direct contradiction to the basic premise of all revealed religions. And that is why their theology that they come forth with about God and His names and attributes and the final day and the day of judgment and the hereafter, about worship, all of this, the concept of worship, philosophers did not worship, even the Muslim ones. As I said, they would say this is for the average folk. We have now arrived at the reality. We know the inner meanings of the religion. That's for you guys that you do this, the outward motions. We've reached the spiritual reality, so we don't need to bow down and prostrate and do wudu. We have reached the actual understanding, the goal. This is for you mortal folks here who don't understand the reality. This is all of the famous quote-unquote philosophers of Islam. They had these types of heretical, blatant kufr beliefs. So there is no such thing in orthodox Islam as philosophy. Legitimate understanding, there's no such thing. And there's no benefit to be gained from the philosophers. Nothing at all. There are questions that are answered within our tradition, and we don't need to go to philosophy. And there are many questions that we don't care about, nor do we think about. We don't have to ask whether we exist or not. This is a question that only fools ask themselves. As for people of intelligence, the average human being does not doubt whether he exists or not. And yet in philosophy, this is an important chapter in science. Anybody, as I said, who's taken anything of philosophy, another thing with philosophers, they love to overcomplicate that which is simple. Okay? Anybody who has studied anything of philosophy, I challenge you, even the most intelligent person, you pick up a book of philosophy, after a page or two, it's like, what is this? don't understand anything. Every word makes sense, but put together, it's Greek. Literally, it's Greek sometimes, okay? I mean, you know, the concept of Aristotle and the forms and the shadows and the cave and the reality. What is this guy talking about? You have no clue. What has this got to do with me? And yet, when you go and sit in your classes, it's like the emperor with no clothes, right? You know the story of the emperor with no clothes. Is that everybody is too embarrassed to admit this is all baloney, it's all BS. Everybody's too embarrassed to say that. And they sit there and they pontificate and they, you know, pretend as if this and that. The reality is these concepts and these ideas have no practical benefit in my life. They won't help me as a human being, much less a Muslim. This is the case with basically all schools and issues of philosophy. So the way that Orthodox Muslims look at philosophy is with disdain. There's no point, there's no benefit to it, there's no need to go study it, and in fact, there's a lot of harm to it. Because again, your mind starts going in circles and starts, you know, going to places where, you know, there's no need to go to. Okay, concepts that we need to know, we find the answers to them in the Quran and Sunnah, and the rest we have no need to get involved with. So that's just a basic prelude to philosophy. And as I said, despite the fact that it's something very rare that you'll hear, I don't mince my words, as you can tell very clearly, and I'll tell you what I believe to be the correct opinion in this regard. And as I said, there is unanimous consensus amongst the schools of Islam, the Sunni schools of Islam at least. There are others who would disagree with this, that there is no need for this topic. However, the reality is that we're living in this country, and in our high schools and undergraduate degrees and whatnot, sometimes we're exposed to it, and we have to take their courses and read their books. And also for the very few people, and this is the exception and not the rule, who are very well grounded in Aqeedah, who understand the Quran and Sunnah inside out, no doubt a very few amongst them should turn to philosophy. Why? In order to expose the weaknesses of philosophy, in order to show that this is basically makes no sense. And of the people who did this, you know, one of the best scholars who ever did this is Ibn Taymiyyah, who wrote an entire book, Ar-Radd ala al-Mantiqiyin, or A Refutation of the Philosopher, which is available in English. Also, it's translated by a very professional translator. It's called Ibn Taymiyyah's Response to the Greek Logicians. That's what it is. Ar-Radd ala al-Mantiqiyin, Response to the Greek Logicians. It is an extremely expensive book, by the way, available from Amazon and other places. And don't even bother buying it, because you're not going to even understand the refutations. They're just too deep. You forget understanding philosophy, you only understand the refutations of philosophy. Trust me. I mean, I have the book at home, and this is the one topic, is seriously. And it's not, as I said, philosophers love to overcomplicate that which is simple. Every person, when they study the science, they feel foolish. They feel, my God, I thought I'm an intelligent person. That's not you who is stupid when you can't understand the books of these people. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, look at the Quran and Sunnah. The average human being understands it. This is what you call eloquence. Eloquence means getting your point across to the audience. When your audience cannot understand you, that's not eloquence at all. When your audience has no idea what you're talking about, you are not the fools, the speaker is the fool. So when these philosophers cannot get their concepts across, when they cannot explain what they want to explain, when every single reader of their books comes out confused, you're not the fools, they are. Honestly, eloquence is to get your point across to the audience. Look at the Quran, how beautiful and powerful it is. That is eloquence. Look at the Sunnah. Even look at the speeches that are famous here amongst the well-known speakers, even Muslim, non-Muslim. You listen to them, you're impacted. Your life changes. You can't stop paying attention. That's what you call eloquence. Look at the philosophers. They don't have any eloquence. They don't have it because you can't understand what they're saying. So don't feel foolish when you read books of the philosophers. Not that you should read, but don't feel foolish. You're not the fools when they can't get their point across. So the general rule of thumb is that philosophy is a science that has no value to it. And on the contrary, not just no value, but it can be, not necessarily, but it can be a very dangerous field as well. And there are many people, unfortunately, I've also met them, that when they studied the science, it's just really, literally, they started asking questions and doubting this, and what about this, and what if that, and this. Questions that the average human being doesn't even think about it. I know a very good, brother who was so practicing, mashallah, whatnot. The brothers told me about him is that he went and majored in philosophy. This is here in America, and he took this class, believe it or not, and we had long debates afterwards after the class. And at the end of the day, subhanallah, the questions he would raise. And the brother became a murtada, the last that I heard. He left the fold of Islam after having been a practicing Muslim, and he took the same class. He heard all I had to say, and he came to me arguing that no, there's a lot of good in this and that, and now he's a murtad basically. A'udhu billah. And the questions that I just looked at him and said, Akhi, don't you see exactly what I'm telling you all? You're asking me the same questions. What if this happens? What if there was a prophet that nobody ever heard about? What if, I mean, these what ifs just come here. Where are you getting these what ifs from? What if you're crazy and I'm the same guy? You know, I mean, think about, so the point being, really and truly, philosophy, it takes your mind into a tangent that sometimes it's not supposed to go there. And it drives a person insane. It's no surprise that many other philosophers lived very weird lives. If you read their biographies, you'll know what I'm talking about. In any case, because of the fact, as I said, you know, that we are exposed to it, I mean, there's no problem, inshaAllah ta'ala, in just getting a little tidbit of what, philosophically speaking, of what philosophers say about the proofs for the existence of God. Of course, we're talking about the proofs for the existence of God. Now we have, most of the philosophers of our times are atheists. In fact, one of the top-selling books of our times right now, as we speak, is a book by a famous philosopher from Oxford who has written a book denying the existence of God. And this is like one of the top books on Amazon.com and whatnot. Don't read this book, obviously, because this is not a part of our religion to go read these shubuhat, to go read these things, and then you cannot respond to them. It's not a part of our religion to just to get involved in this. The reason I'm teaching this to you is because, inshallah, we'll clear up the misconceptions, and also to point out how, you know, sometimes how foolish their ways are. So we're talking about some of the ways that philosophers used to prove the existence of God. And we'll discuss maybe 2 or 3 proofs depending on the time. The first proof that we'll discuss is called the ontological proof. The ontological proof is a proof, once again, the ontological, right? The word ontological. Who amongst you has ever heard the word ontological, except if you've taken a class in philosophy? Nobody has ever heard of the word ontological. Where have you heard it besides a philosophy class? No other, I mean, unless you've taken a class on philosophy, the word is not used. It's not something that's known, but they have to complicate things, pretend that they're so, you know, high and mighty, using words that are unknown to people. Ontological basically means that it is known without having any prior knowledge, it's known by definition basically. It's not something that you need any knowledge for beforehand. The ontological proof of the existence of God was first posited by somebody by the name of Saint Anselm in the 11th or the 12th century of the Christian era, and it was popularized by Descartes. Descartes being the famous one who said, "I think, therefore I am." And other people as well, they tried to prove that this is one of the best ways to prove the existence of God. In modern times, the Swedish philosopher Karl Barth, who died in 1968, he also tried to expound upon this theory. So they say, how do you prove God exists? They say God exists by definition. God exists by definition. Now, how so? Please explain. They say the definition of God is something than which nothing greater can be conceived. This is the definition of God. Nothing greater can possibly exist. You cannot think of something greater than God. So He is the greatest. Okay, Allahu Akbar, He is the greatest, that's the way they say. He is the greatest conceivable being. Okay, now the question arises. This is where everybody just blanks out, so pay attention. Which is greater? Something which is existing only in your mind, or that same thing that you have imagined in actual existence? The one that is in actual existence. Because that which exists only in your mind is not real. Whereas that which exists in actuality is what? It's real. So they said, if God is only in your mind, i.e. there is no God, then the definition would be false. Because an existent God would be greater than a conceptual God. So the definition would collapse. Therefore, God must exist by definition. By definition, He must exist. Because if He didn't exist, this definition would not be right. You guys following? Don't worry about it if you're not. I can only read it once, okay? It's the ontological proof. In other words, as I said, once you've defined this to be a God, then a conceptual God cannot be the greatest possible existence. Because a real God would be greater than a conceptual God. Now, of course, in response to this, the atheist would say, we just don't believe there is something called a God. You can define Him, He doesn't exist. Okay, so there's a very simple way to respond to that, and in our times this proof, again, I mean, none of these proofs, and by the way, none of these proofs that we'll discuss has actually gained any converts. Nobody becomes a believer because of one of these proofs. It's all philosophers arguing amongst themselves and wasting each other's times. Problem is sometimes they waste our times as well. That's the problem. Okay, but in reality, nobody becomes a believer because of one of these proofs. So this is the first ontological proof that they say. The second proof is something called the cosmological proof. And this is a very complicated proof, and unfortunately, it's something we're going to have to discuss a little bit more in the second Aqeedah class, because it deals a lot with the theology of some of the groups out there. Not our own theology, but the theology of other groups. The cosmological proof, the basis of it was first suggested, the shell of it was first suggested by none other than the big Shaykh al-Akbar, Aristotle himself. Aristotle was the first one to suggest the basic premise of the cosmological proof. And it was then taken up by some Muslim, quote-unquote Muslim figures such as Jahm ibn Safwan and Ja'ad ibn Dirham, and then Wasil ibn Ata, and then other Mu'tazila and the people of Kalam, the Asha'ira and the Maturidi, took this proof of Kalam and they expounded it and they incorporated it into Muslim theology. Until to this day, most of the other groups that are outside of our specific Sunni group, most of the other groups claim this is the primary way to prove the existence of God. And they call it the proof from accidents, or there's a book out in English, the Kalam Cosmological Arguments. The Kalam Cosmological Arguments by William something or other. It's available on Amazon as well. Not that you should go and buy it, I'm just saying it's there. That they've emphasized that this is a proof that was very much taken in by the Muslims. And as we said, it has had profound effects on Muslim theology in the non-Sunni groups. When I say non-Sunni, I mean specific us Sunnah, because even others who ascribe to the Sunnah, they have been very profoundly affected by this, and we will return to this in our second Aqeedah class, because it has a lot more to do with Asma'i wa Sifat. But to just give you a very brief summary, the basic premise of this Kalam cosmological argument is that, number one, the basic premise of this Kalam cosmological argument is that affirm the existence of something they call accidents and something they call bodies. What is an accident and what is a body? An accident is, well, let me just say it out, there's no point writing it out. An accident is something that cannot exist for 2 consecutive moments of time. An accident is that which does not subsist for 2 consecutive time frames. What the heck does that mean? An example of an accident is motion, is temperature, is color. Another way that some people have defined accidents is that which cannot exist by itself but needs a body to exist. So can you have motion by itself? Motion needs a body. You can't just see motion. It needs a body. A body, goes without saying, is that which exists by itself. Okay, a body is composed of 3 dimensions, it exists by itself. So this pen is a body. The color of the pen is an accident. The movement of the pen is an accident. Okay, the temperature of the pen is an accident, because it is something which is intrinsic to what? To the body. Okay, that it cannot exist without the body. So they say the world around us is composed of bodies and accidents. This is the first premise. That should be pretty clear, right? Okay, second premise is that all accidents are created. All accidents are created. You cannot have an eternal accident. And they give the example of motion. This is directly from Aristotle's book on metaphysics. I believe it is book P or something. Maybe you can help me out there, I don't know. But if you've read Aristotle's book of metaphysics, directly from there. And this is found to this day in many books of theology which are studied in many institutions and universities around the Muslim world. Exact same. It's as if literally you're reading Aristotle in a book of Muslim theology. And they say that all accidents are created. Now this is where it really gets very philosophical. I'm not only going to go over this once. If you don't understand it, no big deal. They say basically that because there cannot be an infinite regression of causes. There cannot be an infinite regression of causes. Let me just show you what I mean by this in this another piece of paper here. Let's see over here. Okay. Let's say, for example, let's give you the example of a moving ball, let's say C. Okay? So this is a moving ball C. C is moving. Movement is what? Accident or body? It's an accident. According to them, this movement must have been caused by a cause before it. Let's call it B. So something must have hit C to start this movement to come about. Cannot just start moving by itself. There has to be something to cause it to move. Okay? B as well must also have a cause before it, and there must be a cause before that as well. But there cannot be an infinite regression of causes. This is infinity, sorry for my really bad handwriting. That's a better expression. There cannot be an infinite regression. There cannot be, so we cross that out. Why can there not be an infinite regression? Because, now this is where it gets really deep. The very fact that we have reached point C in time and place shows that we have not crossed infinity. Because infinity cannot be crossed. To cross infinity takes an infinity. You never finish infinity. So the very fact that we are actually at right now, point C, where the ball is moving, clearly shows that there is no infinite series of causes before it. There must be a finite series of causes. Even if it's a million or a billion or whatever, but there must be a finite number, not an infinite number. And therefore there must be something called A that was the cause of all causes, the start of all causes. And that was the mover that began all other movements. This is what they call the unmoved mover. Aristotle called God the unmoved mover. God is the beginner of all causes. He himself, though, cannot be moving. Why? Why? Because if we were to say he is moving, then you start the whole thing over again. So he himself cannot have any what? Not just motion. Accidents. He himself cannot have any accidents at all. Because if he did have accidents, what would this mean? Those accidents would require a creator and this and that. So God, according to Aristotle, is the unmoved mover. This is exactly the theology of Ibn Sina and others. Ibn Sina called God al-illat al-ula, or the first cause, the primary cause. This is the concept of God for these philosophers, is that they started motion. So this, now let's get back to this dalil right now. So they say all accidents are created. The third thing they say is that bodies are always characterized with accidents. Meaning that you cannot have a body except that it has accidents. So this is a body. The accident of being stationary or moving, it has to be one of the two. It can't be both or neither. Now that's simple, come on guys. Either the thing is moving or it's not, correct? Can it be both? Can it be neither? It has to be one of the two. So every single, likewise temperature, it must be a certain temperature, correct? Temperature is an accident or substance or body? Accident. Likewise, color. So everybody has to have many different accidents, okay? So that's the third premise, and they prove that as well. Putting all of this together, the conclusion is, well, they have a fourth one as well. All that is composed of created particles must also be created. In other words, if the body is composed of accidents and the accidents are created, how do we know accidents are created? Because of number 2. Right? So if the body is composed of accidents, and accidents are created, then the body is composed of that which is created. Therefore, the final result would be what? The bodies are all created. Therefore, if the bodies are created, this means there must be a creator or an unmoved mover. There must be an unmoved mover. There must be an unmoved mover. This is the final result of this long digression of philosophy. Now, the problem comes in a number of ways. Firstly, as I said over here, extremely complicated. In reality, each of these premises that I quoted you for, each one of them takes up pages of proof. How do you know the world is only composed of accidents and bodies? How do you know that all accidents are created? How do you know that there cannot be infinite regression? How do you know, and so on and so forth. So there's pages of discussion. I have just summarized it in a nutshell. And then, so I said it's extremely complicated. The conclusions are very obvious. Bodies are created. Every person knows that this is created. You don't need to go through all of this. Every person knows we are created. Everything is created. Okay? Every person knows there is a creator. And then I said that there are repercussions that go against Tawheed. This is because, this is a very deep point, but this is because this issue has been used by the scholars of Kalam and the philosophers to apply to God Himself. When they say that God can have no accidents, that's over here, basically, this point here, that all accidents are created, when I say, all accidents are created, so therefore God cannot have an accident in Himself. Because if He did, what would that mean? That is created. An accident is what, according to these people? Attributes, exactly. So therefore the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya and the Zaydiyya and who else is left? The Jahmiyya and the Shia and the Rafida, all of these groups without exception denied or distorted many of the names and attributes of Allah because of Aristotelian logic. And we'll talk about this in Aqeedah too. To this day, there are people who deny Allah comes down from the heavens. Why? Coming down is an accident. Nuzul is an accident. Isn't it? Moving is an accident, correct? And so they say, and literally you will find it in Arabic in their books that are taught to this day in universities and institutes all over the world. And this and that which is composed of accidents must be created. Therefore, to claim that God comes down, a'udhu billah, is to claim He is created. Who said all of this? The Quran tells us, the Sunnah tells us that Allah has attributes, that He has risen over the throne. Risen implies a movement, they say. We don't say this. We say Allah knows. He knows best what happens, but He's told us He's risen over the throne. So they say risen implies a movement, and a movement implies, haraka. Haraka implies an accident. Accident implies that the being is created. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above us, above is an accident, because above and below are accidents, they change. Okay, once again they deny this. All of these names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala they deny based upon Aristotelian logic and cosmology. Nothing to do with the Quran and Sunnah. To this day, as I said, these groups are around, and you look at their books and it is all nothing but this kalam, cosmological arguments. So I say that it has repercussions that go against the concept of Tawheed al-Asma'i wal-Sifat, and that will be the discussion of next class. As for the Quran and Sunnah, it doesn't tell us about accidents and bodies. And worst thing is, who told you to apply? Now by the way, this basic premise might even, will let it go when it comes to us, me and you. But who said that you can apply this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put Allah, a'udhu billah, in the same thing as accidents and bodies and created and created? Who said this? You're the one who invented this schemata. You're the one who are now trying to put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names and attributes to form this principle. Nobody, this is not found in the Quran and Sunnah. Okay? So the point being that they invented this scheme, found in Aristotle. And by the way, many of these groups, the Asha'ira and Maturidiyya, they don't even know where it comes from. They don't even know that this goes back to Aristotle. And as I say, go read his books. Go read, not you guys, but I'm saying if you wanted to refute them, go read, it's literally found in his books, Metaphysics, when he talks about the concept of bodies and whatnot. Literally, the basic premise of this is found in the books of the philosophers. Last point, inshaAllah ta'ala, there's one more proof called the teleological proof. Once again, as I said, they have to overcomplicate the simple. The Teleological proof is actually the most simple proof, and it is something that we've already done and talked about. The teleological proof is also called Paley's watch, because one of the people who really and truly propagated it and made it famous was a Scottish philosopher of the 16th century called Paley. And what Paley said, basically, he gave an example or a parable. He said, imagine yourself walking down the beach. You see these stones and these rocks and these shells, you see the waves crashing, you see all of this around you, no big deal. Now you come across a clock. Now Paley lived in the 16th century. He's not talking about this type of clock. He's talking about these really fancy, complicated, wound up mechanisms with gears and volleys and springs and all of this. You come across an intricate mechanism like this. He says, the complexity of the clock clearly shows that there was a maker of the clock. It's not like the stuff around you now. There's a certain complexity in it that shows you that there is a watch, there must have been a watch maker. Okay? Very simple, and this is actually the most, this is the most Islamic of the philosophical proofs that they have. They call it the teleological proof. It is a pure Islamic proof in the sense it's found in the Quran, and we talked about it. Even though, 2 points. Firstly, even though it is so simple and straightforward, amongst philosophers it is considered to be the most backward. It is considered to be, because it's too simple, they don't like simplicity, isn't it? It's considered to be the most backward and the most ridiculous proof of the existence of God. And they have their critiques of it, which once again, wallahi, I kid you not. I mean, even myself, when I read some of this stuff, and I have to read it because I'm teaching it, whatnot, they bring about these questions, a'udhu billah, it's like stuff that it literally, as I said, scrambles your brain up. And sometimes you just have to close it and say, amantu billah, I believe in Allah, and move on. This is the reality of philosophy. How can you attack this solid proof like this? They have their ways of doing it. And that's why I don't encourage anybody to waste their time with this branch of science, even call it science. So this is the first point, that they dismiss it, totally trivialize it. The second point, even though we agree with Paley's basic premise, we disagree with his example. Who can tell me why? Because he dismisses the creation of Allah as being trivial, and he aggrandizes a watch. He thinks the ocean in front of him is nothing. Don't worry about that. That's trivial. These waves and the life in it, and even the sand and the rocks and the stone, where did it come from? It doesn't come out of nothing. Just because you don't think it's this complex or that, reality is it is matter. Who created this matter? So this specific portion of his analogy we say is incorrect, but the basic premise is correct, and that is that the complexity of life around us clearly shows that there is a creator. There's other proofs as well, the most ridiculous being Paley's argument, right? Not Paley, sorry. Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager. You all know Pascal's wager? It's rather ridiculous. It's basically, he's like this, okay, there's two possibilities. Either God exists or he doesn't exist, right? There's no in between. Suppose God doesn't exist. Let's take two people. One of them a believer in God and a worshipper. The other one an atheist and an evil person. Suppose God doesn't exist. Both of them, what's going to happen at the end when they die? If he doesn't exist, what's going to happen? Nothing. So nobody wins, nobody loses. Suppose he does exist. What's going to happen? One is going to go to hell, the other is going to go to heaven. So in scenario 1, nobody wins and loses. Scenario 2, one winner, one loser. So he said if you had to bet, that's why it's called Pascal's wager. If you had to bet, there's no point betting except in the one that you might as well, either the believer is going to win or it's a tie, a draw. So you might as well believe in God, and if there's nothing, okay, tough, I mean it's not tough luck, that's it. But if there is, then you win forever. So this was his way of proving God existed. It's called Pascal's wager. You might as well believe it is better than nothing. Again, these things didn't bring about any converts in the history of mankind. I don't think anybody became a believing Christian or Jew or Muslim because of Pascal's wager. Utterly ludicrous. That won't bring about Iman or any of these other proofs. Even the Kalam cosmological proof didn't bring about converts. It's all, falsafa. Before we conclude, a comparison between the Islamic proofs and the philosophical proofs is that, I usually ask the students, but there's no time right now, is that Islamic proofs are simple, logical, straightforward. They don't require any presumptions or any previous knowledge of philosophy. They're intelligible. They're understood by the little child to the greatest adult. And you would expect something such as the existence of God to be characterized by these attributes. Western proofs, or I should say philosophical proofs on the other hand, are overly complicated, have too many presumptions, are difficult to comprehend. Most of them require previous knowledge of philosophy. The average human being will never be able to fully understand them, and they have repercussions that go against the perfection of God, such as the Kalam cosmological one. Look at the two. Islamic proofs are simple. Everybody, wallahi, I swear by Allah, 6-year-old kid will be able to understand every Islamic proof. Whereas most of you here would not be able to teach any of these Western proofs to another person. You haven't really grasped them. Too difficult. Which is a sign of a true religion? Which is a sign that this is from a divine being and this is from a man-made object? Likewise, as I said, the presumptions, and this is the first, this is the second, this is the natija, this is the result. Where does this come from? Islamic proofs appeal directly to the soul. Directly. Western proofs go around your way, this and that. That's what Ibn Taymiyyah said about these proofs. He said, they are like a lean piece of dry camel meat on the top of a mountain. Neither is it a juicy piece that makes it worthwhile to get there, nor is it accessible that you just pick it up and eat it. Even if it's lean, at least if it's there, you pick it up and eat it. You have to climb all the way to the top of a mountain, and the result is something not worthwhile. You have to work your mental faculties to such a level, and the result you get to is something which is not worth that result. We know it from before through other simpler ways. This is a simple comparison, and there are other proofs as well for the existence of God, but the ones I've chosen for you are the main ones that just give you a taste and a dose of what philosophy is. With regards to atheists, atheism has always been a minority religion. Always, throughout history. In fact, can we even call atheism a religion? Is that right, to call atheism a deen? Is atheism a deen? Exactly. So atheism is indeed a deen. It is a way of life. Atheism is a deen. It is a way of life. Okay, so atheism, as we said, has always been a minority religion. There has never been in the history of mankind an atheist society or country. Even communism in our times, when they tried to force atheism on the inhabitants, it failed miserably. Look what's happening now after 90 years of communism. The same countries that they thought was all communist, you have Christians, Jews, Muslims, or Buddhists all re-emerging again. They couldn't squash religion. Atheism has always been a minority religion. And as I said, there has never been a society of atheists. There has never been an organized group. Like there have been Christian nations, there are Christian nations, there are Muslim nations, there have been Jewish nations, there is one now, Buddhist nations, you have all of these. You've never had a religion or a society or a nation of atheists. Why? Because it's against the fitrah. It's against the fitrah. You've never had an entire society of atheists. And even when atheists existed, they always have been, and they still are, very, very small minority. There were atheists in ancient Greece. Yes, ancient Greek. Some of the ancient Greek philosophers were indeed atheists. They denied. Some very, very few of the ancient Arabs, the Jahili Arabs, very few of them were also, they denied the concept of a God. Very few, though. You can count them on the fingers of one hand. So atheism has always been a minority religion, as the sister said, because of the fitrah. However, in our times, we find that the percentage of atheists all of a sudden is rising dramatically. Look at America 100 years ago. It's a very Christian nation. The people really and truly were like Sunday going, church going, they were Christian. Yeah, there were some elite atheists around and this and that, but the society as a whole was very Christian. Europe as well, other countries as well. Now, some countries in Europe have an atheist rate of 40, 50%. Some of the more liberal countries, very high rates of atheism. Unbelievable. Even in America, very high percentage of people would identify with atheists. Question arises, okay, it's still a minority. You cannot compare Christians and Muslims and even Hindus and Buddhists to atheists. The percentage is too small in the world. But percentage-wise, it's on the rise dramatically. Question arises, why is this the case? Why is it that in the last so many decades, atheism is and still is on the rise? There must be a reason. Still a minority, but all of a sudden percentages are going higher. I mean, I would just guesstimate, and it's totally off the top of my head, that atheists 150, 200 years ago would probably be in the low 1 digits in America, for example. You know, especially in the Puritan founding fathers and whatnot. I mean, you wouldn't imagine a really, hardcore atheists amongst them, very few. Whereas in our times, literally, it wouldn't be a shock to me if 20 or 30% of Americans identified or sympathized or had that outlook of life of atheists. So the question arises, why this huge percentage change? There are many, 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 many reasons. Technological advancements and knowledge has breed a sense of arrogance that we don't need God. No social repercussions, because an atheist 300 years ago would have to face a lot of ostracization, a lot of pressure, whereas in our times it's no big deal. Disconnected from nature. This is a point that many city dwellers like us have no clue about. We have no connection with the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the very fact that you have to rely upon, rain for your crops to grow so that you eat, that means you need to have a God to pray to. Oh God, send the rain down. Whether it be the God of the ancient Indians or the Christian God or our Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need a God to pray to. The fact that we're cut off from nature, that we don't see. I mean, when's the last time we saw a sunset? When's the last time we saw a full, star-filled sky? When's the last time? We're just cut off, living in these fake or artificial, metal surroundings and lights and whatnot. It desensitizes the heart. Other reasons. So, you should learn this word. It's called hedonism. It's one word for all that you just said. Hedonism. Hedonism is self-pleasure. They just want to enjoy. Okay, so the rise of hedonism, they just want to enjoy themselves and live a life of animalistic nature. True? Very true. So a lack of appreciation of the blessings that they live in, very true as well. Okay, a very important point, let me rephrase that. A total and utter and dismal failure of all other religions except for Islam to provide a logical and a comprehensive worldview. Total and utter failure of other religions to provide basic answers to the most common questions of man. Okay, and that is why, the majority, the large religion of our times, which is Christianity, the average Christian does not really and truly have that faith that motivates the Muslim. He doesn't have that iman, we call it, that zeal, that enthusiasm. Even if they identify with Christianity, even if they say, I am this and that iman that we take for granted, that we understand what it means to believe. Without a doubt, we believe Allah created us. The Quran is the book of God. The average person of another religion would not have that strength. Other religions have not provided, and especially the failure of Christianity in the Western world. Okay, because Christianity ruled over the Western world for many, many, many centuries. And it proved to be an utter and total failure, which led to the Christians themselves to totally reject the idea of a theocratic state. You have to understand that when the Western philosophers and sociologists talk about religions, in reality they're talking about one religion, and that is Christianity. That is their experience. And they consider, they make qiyas, they make analogy between Christianity and all other religions. If Christianity could not solve our problems, no religion can. And they look at the evils of the Christians ruling over them, the Christian church, and they want to apply it to the same thing to Muslim theocracies and Muslim states as well. Okay? Such a radical difference. The average Muslim, when he hears the term Islamic State, he feels optimism, he feels hope, he feels, wow, mashallah. So the average Muslim. The average Christian, when he hears Christian theocracies or Christian states or Christian powers, he gets shudders down his spine, because it brings back memories of repression, brings back memories of evil times, the dark ages, the Middle Ages. Our Middle Ages were ages of glory and grandeur and majesty, power. We have this nostalgia. We look back to the caliphate. Okay, the average Christian does not look back to when the papacy ruled over the Western Europe. You have to understand the mindset, the frame is so radically different, and you have to realize this, especially as du'at are speaking to the other people out there. The way they view the world is so different than the way we view it, and because the world views are so different, sometimes it's difficult to communicate, and it's easy to understand why certain people view our religion and our culture so violently and so evilly, because their experiences with religion has been so different than our experiences. Okay, so it'll help both sides to understand more about each other just by studying each other's history and religion. That's a very good point, which is very true. I would say the average powers that exist in our times are secular humanists. Okay, they're humanists. in that even if they believe in Christianity, they don't believe it as a force, a political force and entity. Yes, there are some people who might, but the average politicians of our time in the Western world, I would call them secular humanists, in the sense that they don't believe that Christianity should be, even if they want Christianity to be the majority religion, they don't think it should interfere with politics. And they're not going to look at Christian values, when it comes to the policies that they enact. So I would consider them secular humanists. So it's a domino effect, I would say, is that when you have more and more atheists and they become more and more powerful, it helps the spread of atheism. Yes, very true as well. There's one point, I know there's a lot of good comments that come back. There's one point as well I want to point out. And that is, how do I phrase this? I mean, it's basically materialism. Okay, materialism. And that is that, let me just give you an example that really it strikes home. Most of us, especially the second generation of Muslims who were born and raised here, you don't understand the luxury of living in this part of the world. You don't understand it. You walk into the grocery store and you look at the number of breads you can get. 35 different varieties of bread. The number of eggs, types of eggs you can get. There's never going to be a point in your mind where you think, I'm going to not have my bread and butter and cheese. In fact, you can choose what type of bread, butter and cheese. The combinations probably number in the millions, just these three put together. You want to make a simple omelet, you have the omega-3 eggs, you have the white eggs, the brown egg, size A, this, that. Such a luxury. Majority of people in the world don't have access to this luxury. If they get an egg, be it omega-3 or cage-free or this or that, they'll be happy, The very fact you walk in and you have the luxury of looking at this entire aisle of cereal, another entire aisle of different breads, different fruits, different vegetables. The year round, you can find all types of fruits and vegetables. This breeds a sense of complacency, of arrogance. It's something that the average human being doesn't have the luxury to feel. The average human being needs that rain to fall and the crops to grow. The average human being barely gets his basic meals a day. This luxury leads to a sense of disconnection between the divine, okay? And that is why atheism is only on the rise in Western countries. In the countries that are still, living quote-unquote in the poverty line and whatnot, wallahi, in many ways, they're a million times better than those in the Western countries. Their lives are more satisfied, there's more joy, there's more love, more family values, even though they might not get their meals a day. The reality is the contentment and the serenity that their lives bring about. You cannot compare it to those living in the quote-unquote advanced or developed nations. So the very fact that we have this luxury around us, and even as Muslims, it's not possible that I live in Medina, and Medina, alhamdulillah, it has nothing compared to America, but still you can always get it. I would just be amazed every time I come back, even though I'm born and raised here. It's just you're living in that country for a whole year, you come back in the summer vacation. It's just shocking. Literally, as I said, I could not go over the fact. I counted once, 35 different types of breads. It's like, wow, that the average human being gets that bread, whatever it is, and he's thankful for it, So the point comes, this excess of materialism, this excess in luxuries. Even if you live a simple life in America, you have access to luxuries that are unheard of for most of the world as we know it. The majority of human beings cannot even compare to the way we are living as an average person in these developed lands. And that breeds a hardening of the heart. It leads to, as I said, a disconnection between us and the divine. And that's something that even we as Muslims have to be extra conscious of, because our spirituality is affected by that. Our iman is affected by that, whether we like it or not. It's very difficult to always remind ourselves of these blessings when we're surrounded, by them. So this, I think, is one of also the strong factors. We don't have to worry about rains and thunders and whether it floods or doesn't flood. We're disconnected from nature. The same concept, but in a different way, is that we will always have our food and all privileges, and there's no question of depending upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more directly. Even though, of course, if Allah wills, and there are many countries that they thought they were all powerful and whatnot, within the span of a few hours or and we all know of incidents that have occurred where countries have literally turned upside down, in the space of a day or two, one event or less than that. So Allah is obviously all powerful and able to do all things, but that breeds a sense of complacency. Okay, now of course when I talk about atheists, we're also including agnostics here, right? We all know the difference between agnostics and atheists, right? An atheist says, there is no God. An agnostic says, I don't know, maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't, Allahu a'lam. So the agnostic, he kind of is doubtful. He's doubtful, I don't really know whether there is a God or not, but for our purposes it's like the same thing. Okay, we're talking about both of those categories. Let's go over the arguments. Argument A. Basically, all religions claim that God is an all-powerful entity. Let me ask you, is it possible that God can create something so heavy that He can't lift it? The most traditional and the most ridiculous and the most nonsensical questions atheists ask. Can God create a stone so heavy that He can't lift it? Either way you answer, you have shown that He is not all-powerful. This is the most common question you hear in the streets, and it is also the most nonsensical question out of all of the questions. Response to this is, the question is illogical. The question is illogical because you are trying to make the infinite finite. You have phrased the question such that either way you answer, you're trying to limit the unlimited. And so the question is phrased in an incorrect manner. This is the key point. Another point is that even if you answer the question either way, the question has nothing to do with the existence of God. The question is about the power of God. So even if we were to answer yes or no, it has nothing to do with existence. It is to do with one attribute, which is power. Another response is, the question has the basic premise that God, a'udhu billah, is like a human being who's working against gravity and lifting. So you're making God into a man, basically, and putting upon Him the constraints of man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited by time and place, nor does He work to lift or work against gravity. Allah created gravity and that which gravity pulls. Okay? So the whole concept, the whole framework is that you're putting God like a man, and then you're asking a nonsensical question that doesn't have a proper answer to it. And even if it had an answer, it is only to do with the power of God and not the existence of God. Okay? So the question itself is flawed. It's a very simple response to that. And there's no point beating around the bush. The question is illogical and flawed. Not every question has a yes or no response, and this is one of them. Okay? The question is flawed from the basic point. Group B is basically very similar, and that is that all religions claim God can do anything. Can God create a circle with 4 sides? Okay? The same, all of the answers of Group A also apply to Group B, and one more as well. Okay? All the answers of A apply, and one more. So it's a little bit one notch above Group A, but it's basically the same thing, and that is that you are the ones who have defined a circle to be that which has no sides. And now you want God to do something that you, by your definition, will not call a circle, and say, can I call it a circle? Okay? So you are the ones who have defined a circle and a square. And then you're saying, can God create a square that's a circle or a circle that's a square based upon your definitions? And this is something which is not impossible because of who God is. It's impossible because of your definitions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do everything. He can do everything. But you are the one who has put 2 different spheres of a circle and a square. You define them as mutually exclusive. And now you want God to do something in the arena of circles and call it a square, or the arena of squares and call it a circle. This will be impossible because of your definitions, and not because of an incapability on the part of God. Okay, so this can be added to that as well. Likewise, the Quran says Allah is capable of all things. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. There is no such thing as a circle with 4 sides. It's non-existent. There's no such thing as a square that doesn't have any sides, or a square with 3 sides. This is a non-existence, not because of a lack of Allah's power, but because you have defined certain things to be various ways. You know, it's not something that any being, any God can do, because you have defined it in this way. Allah can create something, you're not going to call it a circle if it has 4 sides. Okay? So the problem goes to your definitions and not to the concept of a God. Once again, brothers and sisters, these are not invented arguments. These are arguments you will encounter in the street, on the internet sites. You will encounter in, some of the more basic books written by atheists. Yes, the more advanced books, even they realize what a ludicrous type of way this is to deny God. The book that's #1 bestseller these days, I don't want to mention the name of it for no reason, but it's really literally in the top 10 list in the Amazon. And I would not encourage any Muslim to read it, in all honesty. Why? Why would you want to expose yourself to this filth? Would you read a book on pornography? Would you read a book on drugs? Even worse, to read a book about these type of things. You know it's full of these type of views. Point being though, those type of books, they have nothing to do with these simple this is what the riffraff use. This is what the people with no intellect use. And you have to really question the intellect and the intelligence of a person who will deny the existence of God based upon this question. It is not this question that is the reason they're denying God. They have denied God because they want to follow their desires, and just as an excuse, they will say, oh, can God create a circle with 4 sides? Can God lift a stone so heavy he can't create a stone so heavy he can't lift it? These are what the people of little intelligence use. It's not a solid, intellectually sound argument that is used. So both of these are very basic, very ridiculous statements which really you shouldn't spend too much time even thinking about or refuting. Group C is used by some who are a little bit more sophisticated, and that is basically, modern science has proven that life as it exists today is a result of direct evolution from previous life forms. Therefore, it is clear that there is no creator who needed to create. Basically, science explains everything. Okay, so the group C is basically saying that we all know we came out of other beings and other life forms, and there's no need for this unmoved mover or creator. Science explains everything. This can be responded to by breaking up the argument one by one and saying every single statement in this paragraph is incorrect. They say that modern science has proven that life is a direct result of evolution. Is it the fact of evolution or the theory of evolution? It's always going to be a theory. They're never going to be able to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is something that they claim, them and their forefathers before them. And hey, the way I say it is, if you think your great-grandfather was a monkey, fine, that's your family tree. Don't get my family tree involved with that, okay? You can be a great-grandfather, descendants of apes and monkeys and pigs. As for me, alhamdulillah, I am the descendant of Adam and Hawa. Likewise, they say that science explains everything. Wallahi, the exact opposite is true. Science explains nothing. And I'm very firm in what I say. Science explains nothing. Why? Because science explains how, and it doesn't explain why. Science only explains how, but it can never explain why. Why does the earth exist as it does? Why does the kidney do this and the pancreas do this and the gallbladder do this? Why? Yes, it will explain to you how, the mechanisms. Yes, in biology class you will learn. In chemistry you'll learn why or how the chemicals interact. But why? And how did this come about? It will never tell you that. Okay? So science does not explain anything. It only explains the mechanisms. How that mechanism was put into place and why it exists, science cannot answer that. So science does not answer any of these questions. It only tells you. Another point we can say is that science changes. Science changes over time. Okay? What we consider to be solid science of our times, 10 years ago was not solid science. And guaranteed 10 years later, many of the theories that now physicists and scientists and chemists are saying, guaranteed they're going to evolve and change.
Please proceed to the next CD.